Hey YouTube, this is my first demo. I'm showing a little, just the kind of a way that I, as a storyboarder and comics person, approach drawing environments. I don't tend to overthink environments too much. I'll show you a little trick that I will kind of go into in other videos about how I sort of lay a base and treat perspective as a storyboard artist, and that's just through a very simple grid. I think I picked this up on storyboardart.org somewhere. Uh, and yeah, very super useful as a method of just uh, kind of maintaining some semblance of basic geometry, basic perspective. I wish I could get this to not zoom around quite so much. Um, in fact, I think I'll just widen this a little bit so it doesn't zoom around as much. Just a way of like kind of doing grids. The grids are super useful. You can sort of control T and move them around. If you're in Photoshop, you can do really kind of whatever with them. You can make them even more distant and steeper by holding Control down in the transform and pushing them further back. I like to use them as, where is my, oh no, that's my little shortcut that I have for just making the layer opacity appear at 20%. But yeah, grids are super useful as drawing elements. They Grids for me they help to establish camera angle more than anything else. Um, and basically, the idea of a grid, like you can see, this looks basically like a tile floor or something. It doesn't really have to. Uh, you can use a grid as a sky grid if you want to. Just anything really to show the angle that you're working at. So I show my students this little trick sometimes, which is if you have a character sort of dead center, just looking straight at you, with nothing on the face, nothing to indicate where they're looking at all. The moment you add a sky grid, well, now the character's looking down at you, or the camera's at kind of an up angle. If we took this and flipped it, can I flip it? Let me just flip it the old-fashioned way. If I took the same grid and flipped it without changing the character at all, suddenly I've got the character looking up at me, and my camera is at an up angle, at a down angle. Excuse me, I always get those confused. My camera is at an angle looking down at the character, which is quite extraordinary when you think about it. So grids are super useful in that way by establishing context for where the character is looking, uh, and basically like helping you figure out. You could have kind of both happening one at the same time and have a sort of a level thing going if you wanted to, and now suddenly you've got a perfectly eye level shot going, and it's all context. The character hasn't moved. Nothing at all has happened with the character. Even if we take this, let's take this floor grid over here. If we stretch it out or pull it up, and the higher we pull it, the more our character appears to look up at us, which is super interesting. So that's what I kind of teach students about when it comes to just grids, and I kind of approach texture and grids in animation and in drawing and in environment generally fairly similarly, and kind of like it's a bit of a Disney method that I picked up a while ago, just by kind of studying artists like Will Weston, kind of their work, and sort of figuring out that you can obviously give the environment kind of volume lines. Um, and the volume lines can do quite a lot. If you sort of think about, maybe if we make this simple and we sort of think about like either a desert with kind of sand lines, or we think about a field, plowed in rows, you can sort of see how the landscape itself would start to have these lines of volume around it, which can be very beautiful and really useful for describing the shape of landscapes and uh, describing our environment generally. The the grid system kind of works, I find, when it comes to I'm doing a scene right now in my comic Sophie the Giant Slayer, where the characters are kind of surrounded by these steep walls of rock, and I do something similar to the grid system. Only I do it in I kind of carve out these little bits of rock, and I try to mimic the striations that you sort of see in rock, that kind of those sort of sedimentary lines that you find in rock. And then sort of bring the sort of the quote unquote tile lines of the grid, like if the grid was like this basically, kind of bring those tile lines across and down in slight little steps, so that you can see the planes of the rock a little bit more clearly. This is honestly more thought than I generally even put into it. This is before I've even gotten into the shading. Literally just playing around with the effects of uh, making the planes sort of work, putting these little marks, these little pocks in the rock. The rock I think I'm doing right now seems to be fairly smooth, but you can always make little gashes in it, kind of, and sort of play with the planes of it that way. When it comes to when it comes to sort of layering for animation, or layering, I don't know, grass or something, I'm fairly loose and even a little bit childish about it. But I like to find sort of like where the lines are, where the flow of it is, if this was, say, a little walkway or something, and say I'm just going to do a little walkway in a forest path or something, overlap is huge. And again, sort of using these planes where we might, if this was like a maybe do things a little different color so you can kind of see what when I'm trying to explain a principle. But if I was to do I don't know, say like a bank of grass with a cutting in it, and there was a bit of tree there, for example, and there's grass kind of growing on it. The grass is just there to kind of indicate that the top of this cutting is fluffy. I don't even know if it's called a cutting. That's just what I think of when I hear the word cutting. But then on the side of it, I can sort of carve into it or carve it out, like a slice of birthday cake, basically. And then go on further with, thinking what would be at the bottom of this. Is it a stream, maybe? Is it water? Can we have some lovely water streams kind of going over here? And remember, this is all just playing with line. We're not even getting into shading at all. Can we start playing with round bushes and so on? Can the bushes kind of cover parts of this? Can we start to overlay things? Layering is really important if you're trying to draw nature and if you're trying to give an impression of depth. And obviously, the closer something is, the more detail we sort of see in it. So the bushes can be a little more detailed. We can go into a little bit more detailed grass and stuff here. Where here, it's like you can kind of like the grass can be a little less fluffy. The grass can be a bit more smooth way in the back there. So you can kind of see how very quickly you can start to build up this idea of nature sort of happening. Let me get back to the original picture and see what can come out of this. Yeah, what did I do? I did not cut it out as I intended to do. I just doubled it. It is, there we go. Control Shift J to cut it out. So yeah, if we're kind of going with a forest path or something, it's less about maybe like lines going across things, although you can see that as I put a line across that, it immediately sort of gives a sense of stability and sort of solidness, because this is obviously then not a river line. A river line probably wouldn't have stuff like that. If this was a river versus a path, a river might still have little stones in it, might still have little things in it, but if it's just all flowy lines kind of going around like this, I would be kind of tempted to go, well, that could be a stream if I didn't have any other further information. But the moment I start to put lines across it a little bit, again, sort of harking back to the tile pattern of the grid that we did there, instantly that adds a little bit more structure to it. Instantly, my mind kind of goes, that's not a river. A river doesn't have counter-crossing lines like that, unless maybe there's a shadow falling over it or something along those lines. But there's nothing else indicated, so my brain kind of goes path, not river, which is pretty interesting. Yeah, you can kind of see I don't, especially when it's in the sketching phases. Like, I'm a storyboard artist by training. I don't bother with detail. I don't bother detailing. It doesn't bother me. We just kind of give each other. I do love detail. Detail is beautiful. Detail is storytelling. Detail is really just, you can enjoy detail a lot, but I don't get caught up in trying to over perfect detail. If detail's not working for me, I leave it alone mostly. So, especially there's just a lot about detail that I think once you start storyboarding more often and more frequently, you start to realize that detail is what your brain tells you it is. Detail has very specific connotations for your mind. Like a fir tree has a very specific sort of shape, and that makes a very specific imprint in your brain. And you don't necessarily you have to play to what your brain recognizes. I think of it as kind of playing with symbolism almost, where our as we grow up, as we learn, as we become more literate as human beings, our brains are taught to recognize certain shapes and certain symbologies. So we recognize certain, like we use that. Why not use that? Why try and reinvent the wheel when it comes to grass, for example? Unless we want to do that for a very specific purpose. But if a fir tree has this sort of triangular look to it and it looks sort of spiky, and that's what a fir tree looks like to just about anybody who's ever seen a fir tree, then why not just use that? Why get more complicated with it, really? The only sort of points that accuracy really earns you is not telling a different kind of story, not telling a counterintuitive story. For example, if I went and, if I was just doing a bunch of fir trees like this, and I went and did, I don't know, something on the fir tree, like, let's say I decided to do pine cones, but I somehow did pine cones in this shape. Suddenly I've got I'm saying something very differently here. Those, like, or even if I just put two quote unquote pine cones, like pine cones over here, instantly my brain says something different. My brain says that tree has eyes, because that's what our brains do. It looks for very simple symbologies. It looks for, I don't even know if symbology is really the proper word. It looks for very simple symbols. And you have to be kind of careful with your symbols. If you're going to do symbols in any kind of pattern, this is starting to look like a cake of some kind, but I'm okay with it. So I don't even know what kind of a pine tree. I haven't actually seen a pine cone on a pine tree in a good while. So, but this is what this is kind of what I'm saying. You can't, if you're trying to tell one specific kind of story, don't put in detail. Don't give the tree Mickey Mouse ears, for example. I'm being stupid here, but don't try and tell a different story to the one you were trying to tell, is the point I'm trying to make. So yeah, in conclusion, I want to go over the basics of approaching environment, which one is definitely flow. Let me write that better. First principle is flow. The second principle would be grid, looking for where the grid is, if it's anywhere. And third principle would be layering. And a fourth unofficial principle, I guess, would be detail, actually. So detail is not, again, not to be despised, but detail is more cumulative over the course of a drawing. So kind of start with, these don't have to go in any specific order, but if we wanted to go with, with these things in order, we might think about where are the kind of flow that happens. You could think of this as composition, perhaps. The flowing lines that might happen in your environment. You might think of where the grid starts to happen. Maybe there's kind of a gridding pattern closer up. Maybe the grid forms part of the detail work in a way. Maybe the layering is certainly kind of going on here, and it really goes on for a long time. Like clouds definitely form part of that layering. The back of this could be mountains or something. The detail in it would really maybe really help with scale. So if I did a pine cone like over there, for instance, you'd suddenly start to have an impression of like how far away things are in this picture. And I could repeat that detail closer up. So if I repeated the detail over here, for instance, then suddenly I have a very clear idea of distance kind of going on in this drawing. If I started adding on further, then this starts to add to the cumulative effect of the thing. Where again, I could add any number of trees and so on, but I could just as well add grass going off into the distance there. The grass is also kind of a distance indicator in many ways, and maybe the flow of it, the gridding pattern here. Also, like fun little trick, by the way, with grass is not only can you put grass on planes, but you can actually cut the grass silhouette into places. So if you want to interrupt a little bit of line there to put some grass in, that's a great way to do it. But you can kind of see how I started out with a very nothing kind of picture. Now suddenly I have something that looks like a picture. And again, this is before we've even gone and done anything funky like adding in shading, adding in some kind of grounding shading to these front trees here, to kind of pick them out a little bit more, or add a sense of shade happening, or decided where the light's coming from, what time of day it is, before we've done any of that stuff. So even before any of that, it already starts to look like kind of like a picture, which is really cool. So I hope that was helpful. Again, think of flow, think of grid, think of your layers, and think of your detail, and think of detail as helpful, not something to be agonized over. And experiment. And please, if you want to, share what your experiments have led you to. Thanks and take care.